And as a country with big aspirations, Singapore has been among the biggest beneficiaries of this policy. Now on BBC World News, Talking Business Asia.
Open trade, open doors and open borders have helped Singapore to grow its economy from colonial trading port to financial powerhouse in 3 generations. But globalization is under threat from populism and the pandemic, and Singapore must now reinvent itself again. How it writes the next chapter of this new era will be key to its survival.
Globalization will be under pressure, but you cannot avoid working with one another, because to go back to where you were, that way lies poverty and despair, and probably instability and conflict.
Welcome to Talking Business Asia. I'm Karishma Vaswani. I'm at Changi Airport, one of the most well-connected travel hubs in the world and arguably one of the most visible symbols of Singapore's global success. But COVID-19 changed all of that.
As borders shut, these departure lounges emptied out, planes were mothballed and thousands of staff lost their jobs. 12 months on, Singapore is desperately trying to reopen its doors, and the airport is playing a key role. In this terminal, the crowds are back, but they're not here to fly. It's been transformed into a vaccination center for frontline workers. But in Singapore, that doesn't mean only nurses and doctors. Everyone here today is from the aviation sector. That includes Yanti, who works in customer service. She's considered a frontline worker here. It's why she's among the first in line.
It's very sad to look at the situation now because it's very quiet. If everybody plays their part to actually get vaccinated, and it'll be safe for everyone to travel, and then we can start going back to how the normal is.
Aviation workers aren't the only ones at the top of the list. Along with the elderly and healthcare workers, Singapore is also putting maritime and transport workers at the front of the queue.
It may look like business as usual, but it's not. There's something missing. Tourists. This isn't enough to get Singapore's economy back on track. It's got to open borders and the economy to survive.
Borders here have been closed for over a year because of the pandemic. Jobs have been lost and businesses have shut for good. That's why the government spent close to $80 billion to support workers. A huge amount for a population of 6 million people.
We have another one at the polyclinic nearby.
It's also why Singapore is ramping up vaccination efforts. I joined the Prime Minister on a tour of this centre. There are dozens just like it across Singapore. The goal is to offer the vaccine to everyone who wants it by September.
How much of a game changer is this vaccine for Singapore, do you think?
The only way for us to stop being vulnerable and to open up to the world again is to get ourselves protected with a vaccine very comprehensively, which we can do within this year. It will not be a full answer because, first, it's not absolutely foolproof. Secondly, you'll have new mutants turning up and we may need further vaccinations. Thirdly, the other countries are not all ready to come out from lockdown yet. So even if we are ready to do business, you need partners.
COVID-19 is arguably the biggest post-war crisis this city-state has ever faced. And when the doors do eventually open, and this airport is busy again, what sort of world lies on the other side? Navigating that new world is one of the key challenges for Prime Minister Loong as he charts the next course for Singapore.
Prime Minister, thank you for joining me on Talking Business Asia. We're more than a year into the pandemic. Is the worst behind us?
Well, we have to keep on watching to see how the virus mutates, whether new strains evolve, and how quickly the vaccines can catch up, and how quickly the governments can proliferate the vaccines and vaccinate everybody. It's a massive task. Nobody has ever tried to vaccinate the whole population of the world within a year or even 2 or 3 years. So I think that we are going to be struggling with this for some time yet, but we are no longer defenseless.
When you say struggling for some time yet, Prime Minister, how long? How long do you see the pandemic lasting?
It will not last forever. Pandemics have happened before. I hope after several years this will subside too, one way or the other. And we can learn to live with this if it doesn't disappear, which I don't think is going to disappear. And that may be 3-5 years.
When do you see life returning to normal? I know you projected that the pandemic might last 3 to 5 years, but travel, for instance, when do you see that and normal life coming back?
I hope if many countries can have substantial proportions of their populations vaccinated by later this year, we will be able to have the confidence and to have developed the systems to open up our international borders to travel safely again. It won't be like before where you can just buy a ticket, hop onto the plane and go off to Hong Kong or Bangkok or Bali for a weekend, just a casual holiday. You have to plan for it, you must have some documentation, you need some way to prove that you have been properly vaccinated and maybe be tested to prove that you have the antibodies in you when you fly. But hopefully by end of this year or next year, the doors can start to open, if not earlier.
Singapore's contact tracing app was sold to the public as a way to identify people at risk of being infected by the virus. But your minister admitted in Parliament that police can also use it to access data for certain crimes.
Yes. As we have explained in Parliament, and we've passed legislation to say that you can only access the contact tracing information for certain enumerated serious classes of crimes, such as terrorism, murder, kidnapping, rape, violent crimes. And we have to go by the law. If you don't go by the law, you go to jail.
There is a concern, and we've read this on online forums from your own citizens, about how wide-reaching this app could be, and that if in the first instance there was a sense that perhaps not the whole truth came out, that could you then use it again for some other purpose?
I think we made a mistake. I mean, this app was designed for tracing, for contact tracing, for pandemic purposes, but under the law, which covers everything, the police have powers to ask for information for criminal investigations, for police investigations, and it covered this app, and we should have said so up front. We didn't, and we came out and we said so. When one of our own MPs raised the question, we had to come out and explain this. I think there was anxiety, there was a reaction, quite a strong one, and after the pandemic is over, we'll delete the information. And I think people have accepted that, and we will be able to live with this.
Is the pandemic a gateway, do you think, to a world where surveillance is more acceptable to people and useful for governments? Other countries are looking at surveillance apps or contact tracing apps like this.
I think it's not just a pandemic, it's a modern world. Even without surveillance apps, there are all kinds of apps which track where you have been and what you are doing. And there are other apps, and the owners of these apps collect the information and often resell them. But the fact is that privacy, as in the days before the internet and Wi-Fi and Google image search, is not the same anymore anywhere in the world. And this is something which people have to get used to. At the same time, it's something which societies have to find ways to deal with to protect the legitimate concerns which people have that this is going to be used against them. So I think that there is a certain tension between individual rights and privacies and our need to work together as a society, as a community, and to trust one another.
Stay with us, because after this short break, we'll hear more from Prime Minister Hsien Loong.
Do you think the US needs to accept that it's no longer number one?
I think the US is still number one, but number two is not so far behind, and that's what is difficult for the US to accept.
In
In the world of business, everything is connected. From global hubs to places less traveled. The big stories to your bottom line. The path can be unpredictable. But with the right insights, you can see where the bend in the road will lead. Business on BBC News. Make the connection.
A historic peace deal has shaken up alliances in the Gulf, the Middle East and the rest of the world. But what does this new warmth between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Israel mean for business? Join me, Samir Hashmi, in Dubai for Talking Business, only on BBC World News.
Welcome back to Talking Business Asia. I'm Karishma Vaswani. In a moment, we'll hear more from Singapore's Prime Minister Hsien Loong. But first, let's take a look at how trade and globalization have transformed Singapore's economy and how this tiny nation is carving out a future for itself in a post-pandemic world.
The bridge between East and West. Singapore has always been at the center of trade and commerce, but it was globalization that really helped Singapore transform from a colonial trading port into this, a global city connecting people, trade and business, all in the space of the last few decades. Inderjeet Singh is one of many business owners who rode the wave of globalization. His products are designed in Singapore, made in China and Turkey, and shipped all over the world, the very definition of this economic trend. But with a growing backlash against globalization, he's worried about Singapore's future.
There has been a general sentiment among the population that the globalization is actually is negative for them. They no longer enjoying the benefits of wage growth that they saw in the past. So I think the governments are under a lot of pressure to protect their economies and protect jobs for their locals.
The pandemic has seen thousands of job losses in Singapore in some of the country's key sectors of tourism, hospitality and aviation. It's made it harder to bring foreign talent in, and many Singaporeans aren't prepared for the jobs of the future. These Singaporeans are on a digital skills boot camp, learning to become software developers. The government is under pressure to help workers upskill, so it's paying the students, the teachers and the companies that eventually agree to employ them. Farhan lost his job in the oil and gas industry because of the pandemic and is desperate for work.
I have big hopes for how the course is, and then I keep asking myself that you're going to get there.
The goal is to finish boot camp with a job offer, but there's no guarantees. And just like Farhan and these graduates, Singapore is trying to adapt to a post-pandemic world, but no one knows exactly what that's going to look like.
Just how badly has Singapore been hit by the pandemic and by the larger forces against globalization?
Well, the pandemic has been an enormous upheaval for us. Economically, last year we had minus 5.5% GDP growth, which is our worst ever. In terms of cases, we've had quite a lot of cases, 60,000 odd. But fortunately, most of them have not been severe cases, so our fatalities have been very, very low. I think so far we've 29 died of COVID. But the social impact, the disruption, the anxieties over loss of pay, loss of jobs, over what will you do with your children at home when schools close, that has been pervasive. Globalization is a longer-term problem, or deglobalization. There have been trends underway for some time now, not least because of USChina, but not just that. And with the COVID experience, that may give it a further push. I hope not over the edge, but it will push it a little bit further, because Everybody will say, I need to make my own masks, I need to have my own supply chains. And when everyone scrambles at the same time for something scarce, it's not very good for the world.
So is the era of globalization over?
I hope not. I think there's a lot going for globalization even now, because not every country can make its own vaccines, and even the countries which can make their own vaccines need to cooperate with one another. So I think that globalization will be under pressure, but the imperative for countries to cooperate, for businesses to operate across many geographies, to tap resources, bring them together, bring skills and talents and experiences together, and then serve markets all around the world. I don't think that's going to disappear. It will be moderated, and there will be tensions. Tensions over security, tensions over competitiveness, who controls the technology. But you cannot avoid working with one another, because to go back to where you were, that way lies poverty and despair, and probably instability and conflict.
Globalization, even in your own country, hasn't always benefited everyone. Many people have felt left out here. Do we need a new economic model?
I think globalization has benefited everybody in Singapore. You may not feel it so, but if we did not have the multinationals here, if we did not have the international trade that we have, if were not open as we are, I have no doubt all of us would be worse off. But what has generated tensions is when the interface is so stark, people see the competition directly because they are in a global market now, but at the same time they understand that our way forward cannot be to close ourselves up, because if we do that, we are all going to be worse off.
Is that the way you see Singapore growing in the future, given the backlash against globalization that we're seeing now?
We will work very hard to do that. It's not just a matter of good intentions, but also whether or not we can make sure that people see that globalization is working out for them. And for the people who feel that the competition is fierce and the future is unpredictable, that in fact that they know that there's an extra help for them, there's extra support for them, that they are not alone in this, and that in Singapore we will make sure that they are well looked after, provided they make the effort to continue to upgrade themselves. And we're putting a lot of effort into this. We've got Skills Future, which is a comprehensive program to train and retrain people throughout their working lives after they have left school. Courses, recognition, schemes, arrangements with employers, government subsidies. Every country is trying to do this, but we're trying to do it more systematically and with our full resources behind it.
The US-China relationship has deteriorated significantly over the last few years. When the time comes, which one will you choose?
I hope the time does not come. I mean, it is not possible for us to choose one or the other, because we have very intense and extensive ties with both the US and with China, economic as well as in other areas. And so too do many other countries in the world. So I don't think this is a dilemma only to Singapore. It's a problem for many countries in the world, which is why we are all hoping and encouraging the two large powers to think very carefully before embarking on deciding that the other one is an adversary and one which has to be kept down, if not put down.
What would it take, do you think, to get to a point where we see real military conflict between China and the United States? How likely is the possibility, do you think?
It's more likely than it was 5 years ago, but I think the odds of a military clash are not yet high. But the risk of severe tensions, which will raise the odds later on, I think that's considerable. Because both sides take their domestic calculations as paramount. What's their domestic position? How can they secure it? What must they do with their own populations? And their external relations are based on that. And therefore, it's not so easy to say, well, the external logic compels you to work together, because the internal logic may impel you to take a very hard line, and then you may find yourself at an impasse and clash. And that can easily happen.
Do you think the US needs to accept that it's no longer number one?
I think the US is still number one, but number two is not so far behind, and that's what is difficult for the US to accept.
And when it comes to China, you know it very well.
I wouldn't claim that.
What I wanted to ask you is how concerned you are with the direction that China is taking politically.
Well, we cannot judge the domestic pressures which lead China to make the decisions it makes, but I think internationally the position which it has taken, it has won it some friends, but at the same time it has led to tensions with major powers, and there is significant uncertainty, anxiety over which way China is going and will this be good for them. And I don't think that is in China's interest.
So what do you think might be a better solution or a better way?
I would hesitate to give advice to other countries' leaders. I think they all make their own calculations. But what we would like to see is China being able to be a country where its prosperity and its development and its growing strength is welcomed by other countries in the world who see this as an opportunity for them to prosper together and to live in a stable world together. And even now, many, many countries, including Singapore, want very much to maintain good relations with China in order to benefit from China's development and to co-prosper with them. So I think that that is a very important factor which China has had in its favor, which it would be a pity to miss out on in the next phase. If you look at America, it used to be that the business people, American businessmen, MNCs, would be one of the strongest advocates for China and for good relations with China, because they saw the opportunities there, they saw how they could prosper there, they were investing there, they were trading. Walmart buys enormous amounts from China, and it benefits Americans, not just Walmart, but benefits American housewives and ordinary people all over the country. But in the last 5-7 years, I think American business attitudes have shifted, and they are now no longer as open in their support of China. In fact, there's quite a lot of pushback. It's not that the opportunities are not there, but they see that China has moved forward, and they want to see a more open environment and one where they get a bigger bite of the cherry. I think it's understandable. China is a new position now, and you have to make a different, set a different balance in your relationship with the world, and what the world was prepared to grant you in an earlier phase now has to be reworked. And that's quite difficult for a country to accept.
Indeed, and it makes it quite difficult for a country like Singapore that sits in the middle of all of this to navigate. When you do try and
Yes.
navigate with these
Yes.
big economic and political powers, what are some of your key considerations?
First, what is in Singapore's interest? How do we make a rational assessment of that and make that judgment for ourselves and hold our people together, persuade them that this is the right thing to do? And generally, it is that we want to be friends with both, but we have to find our right way, our own way forward. And from time to time, there will be kerfuffles. And we have had kerfuffles with China once in a while, with America also once in a while. And when that happens, you have to understand it cannot be helped between countries. This happens. It doesn't mean we are your opponent, but it does mean that we have problems which need to be worked through. And meanwhile, other areas where we can continue to work together. And that is how we do it.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for joining us on Talking Business Asia.
Thank you.